John stood by the window, holding the final RSVP list in his hand. Names of friends, colleagues, and family members stared back at him, all set to witness the day he had waited years for, his wedding with Sophia. Behind him, laughter floated in from the hallway, where Sophia was rehearsing her vows with Clara. Her voice was light, almost glowing. She sounded happy, peaceful, even should have made his heart full. But something about her ease made him feel strangely distant. He turned, watching as Sophia traced invisible circles on her palm, and whispered the words she had written. They were beautiful. They were hers, but they no longer felt like they were meant for him. That evening, over tea, she looked at him with a softness he hadn't seen in months. "I want to tell you something before the ceremony," she said, gently setting her cup down. "Something I should have said earlier." John nodded slowly, the silence already preparing him for the shift. "It's about Smith," she continued. "You know, he saved my life in that accident. The doctors said he could never have children after the damage, and I don't know. I kept feeling like I owed him more than gratitude." She paused. "So I offered to carry a child. For him. I didn't sleep with him. It was just IVF. Nothing more." Her voice cracked, but her expression remained steady. "I hope you can understand. I just couldn't let his future die because of what he did for me." John didn't flinch. He looked at her the way someone watches the last leaf fall in autumn, expected. Quiet, inevitable. He reached out, brushed her hair from her cheek, and whispered, "Thank you for telling me." Sophia smiled, relieved. She leaned in, rested, her forehead against his. "I knew you'd understand. That's why you're the one I'm marrying." He kissed her temple once. That night, while the house slept, John packed a single bag. He erased all wedding emails, backed up none of their photos, and deactivated every trace of himself from their shared plans. By morning, he was gone. Sophia woke to sunlight and silence. No note, no message, just an empty closet and a voicemail that simply said, "Some debts repay love, others erase it. You never asked what this cost me." John had always been the kind of man who moved through life with quiet precision. Reserved, measured, the kind of person who remembered birthdays without needing a reminder. Who knew how to comfort someone without needing to speak. His work in biomedical research had trained him to observe patterns, to recognize the quiet signals most people missed. But nothing in his years of research had prepared him for the unpredictability of loving someone like Sophia. They met during her recovery after her accident. After the surgeries, after the fear. Sophia had been fiery even then, her spirit stronger than her body. She smiled through pain, deflected worry with sarcasm, and cried only when she thought no one was watching. But John watched. Not out of pity, never, but with a deep, steady admiration. He helped her rebuild her mobility, her career, her confidence. He gave her space when she needed it, and held her hand when she didn't know she did. 9 years they spent together. Late nights, quiet mornings, long hospital corridors, and silent car rides after bad news. He wanted a home, a dog, maybe children, but more than anything, he wanted peace. And in Sophia, he thought he had found it. But Sophia wasn't built for peace. She was built for feeling. Gratitude came to her, like breath, automatic, unfiltered, and overwhelming. When Smith, her former classmate, pulled her out of a burning vehicle after a highway accident, something inside her shifted. Smith was badly injured. The cost of his bravery was permanent. A spinal injury and damage that made him infertile at first. Sophia visited him out of guilt. Then obligation, then something more. She talked about him often, his bravery, his loneliness, his regret. John listened, sometimes quietly, sometimes with unease he didn't voice. He had no reason to be jealous. Smith wasn't trying to steal her. He was simply there. And Sophia, always led by emotion, wanted to ease his loss, so she made a decision. One she didn't ask John about. One she didn't need his approval for. She offered Smith her body not as a lover, but as a vessel. IVF, no intimacy, just biology. To give him a child, because she felt he had earned one. To her. It was kindness. To John, it was the quietest form of betrayal. Not because of sex. Not because of secrecy, but because Sophia had given away something sacred, something they had never even begun to share. John never believed in love at first sight. He believed in steady things, like repetition, trust, and proof. That's why he didn't fall for Sophia in the first month, or even the second. He fell for her slowly, like dawn, not lightning. It began with the way she laughed at his dry humor when no one else did. The way she refused to wear her hospital wristband properly because it clashed with her bracelet. And the way she hated pity more than pain. They first met when Sophia was admitted to the research hospital where John worked. A hit and run had shattered her ribs, dislocated her hip, and left her bedridden for 3 months. John was assigned as part of the rehabilitation support unit, meant to help with long-term recovery planning. Their relationship, at first, was professional structured updates, daily routines, neutral tones. But Sophia didn't do neutral. She asked questions. No patient ever asked about his life, about his opinion on soulmates, about whether he believed in second chances. He never gave her full answers, but she kept asking. And one day, when she was crying silently during a medication adjustment, John didn't hand her tissues. He just sat by her side, let the silence stretch, and that became their rhythm. After she was discharged, Sophia insisted they stay in touch. She invited him to coffee, then to a gallery opening, then to meet her friends. Eventually, she moved into his small apartment when her rent fell through, and never moved out again. Years passed, like chapters. They shared everything: food bills, savings goals, grief, joy. He taught her how to budget. She taught him how to dance in the kitchen barefoot. He was her steady. She was his storm. And in that strange balance, they made something that felt like home. Clara, her best friend since school, once told him privately, "I've never seen her rest until she met you." It meant the world. But storms don't stay still for long. Smith entered their lives during a rare moment of stillness. It had been 6 years into John and Sophia's relationship, and things were finally calm. John's research was progressing. Sophia was launching a trauma awareness campaign, and they had just begun talking about kids, tentatively, carefully. Then Smith's name popped up on Sophia's phone again. At first, just updates: he'd moved back to the city, was recovering well. She visited him once, then twice. Eventually, he started calling her when he needed someone to talk to. John didn't interfere. He trusted her. But something shifted. Sophia began returning home quieter, more reflective. She spoke of Smith with reverence, about how his courage saved her, how he never asked for anything, how life had stolen his future. One night, while folding laundry, she looked up and said, "If you ever needed a kidney, I wouldn't hesitate. I just want you to know that." John smiled. "I know," she added softly, "and if you ever needed me to carry your child, I'd be ready." He looked at her then, eyes tired from work, but full of belief. "Someday," he whispered. But that someday never came for them. Instead, Sophia came home 3 months later, and told him, gently, that she had already started the process with Smith. She explained it clinically. IVF, no physical contact. Just a decision made from compassion. He sat at the table, hands clasped, listening as she justified giving her womb to another man. John didn't argue. He just looked at her, the woman who once swore she couldn't live without him. explaining away the most intimate choice of their future like it was a favor. He realized then that he had become a spectator in a life he was supposed to build. A guest in his own story. Sophia once said love meant sacrifice. But this wasn't mutual. It wasn't discussed. It wasn't theirs. It was hers. And she had already made the choice. The brunch was meant to be casual. Just a few friends, a sunny terrace, and light laughter before the chaos of wedding week began. Clara brought flowers. John brought a quiet smile. Sophia, in her soft yellow dress, radiated contentment, like she'd already said her vows to the world. Clinking her glass gently, she stood up. "I wanted to share something," she said, glancing around. "You're all family now, so, ... here goes." John paused, mid-bite. Sophia placed her hand on her belly, subtle, but certain. "I'm 8 weeks along." There was a beat of silence. Then cheers, gasps. Clara's shocked, "Waiter, you serious?" And someone shouting, "You too," didn't even wait for the honeymoon. John didn't react. Sophia continued, glowing. "It's not John's, it's Smith's. IVF. It's something I did to thank him for everything." Chatter stalled. Forks froze mid-air. Clara blinked. John didn't flinch. Sophia kept going, voice soft. "I wasn't sure when to say it. But I realized this baby is part of something bigger. A thank you to the universe, to second chances, to survival. Smith gave me my life. I just wanted to give him back something that mattered." John raised his glass. "To gratitude," he said, the table toasted. No one noticed the hollow in his voice. That night, back home, the apartment was quiet. Sophia hummed from the bathroom, folding wedding towels. She didn't notice when John opened the drawer, slid the ring off his finger, and placed it neatly beside her perfume. He sat at his desk and opened a blank email. No subject, no greeting, just a single sentence. "Thank you for loving me in your own way. I just needed something different." He hit send. Then he deleted his inbox, disabled his cloud backups, and wiped every wedding draft folder they had built together. By midnight, his name was removed from the catering list. The honeymoon tickets were cancelled. His spot at the altar was erased. Before dawn, John boarded a quiet red-eye flight to Denmark. Sophia woke up smiling, unaware the apartment door had closed behind her for the last time. Sophia gave birth on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. The labor was long, but calm. Smith was there, nervous, pacing, trying to seem worthy of the moment. The baby came out with a quiet cry, wrapped in thin arms and grateful tears. They named him Eli. John, of course, wasn't there. He had vanished 2 weeks before the wedding and hadn't contacted anyone since. No goodbye to Clara, no letter left behind. Just the absence of a man who once folded Sophia's scarves before laundry and remembered how much cream she liked in her coffee. At first, Sophia was too overwhelmed to notice the ache. The baby needed her. Smith needed her. The media caught wind of the story. Hero dad and surrogate mum, welcome miracle child, and Sophia, ever articulate, played her role with grace. She spoke at one panel, then another. People called her selfless, brave, inspirational, but behind the praise, the house was quiet. Smith tried. He brought flowers, learned how to swaddle, even tried to cook. But the rhythm wasn't right. He wasn't a partner. He was a symbol. A ghost of a sacrifice now bound to her in flesh and blood. Late at night, when Eli wouldn't sleep, Sophia found herself staring at her old email drafts. Messages she never sent. Words she had written 100 times in her head. "Did you think I wouldn't miss you? You could have told me you were hurting. I didn't think it would break you. I thought you'd understand." But she never hit send. And John never replied, because there was nothing to reply to. Instead, news of him trickled in through academic circles. A quiet keynote in Switzerland. A new paper published on gene-mapped recovery therapies. His name. Attached to a small pediatric grant fund. No photos. No interviews. Just acknowledgements. In footnotes. In hospital corridors, Sophia began to collect them. Not in a folder, but in her mind. John had always hated the spotlight. He used to joke, the best work is the kind no one claps for. Now he was living it somewhere across the world, building a legacy without ever raising his voice. Eli turned 1. Smith moved out 3 months later. Not out of resentment, but understanding. I think you still breathe his name when you sleep, he said gently. Sophia didn't argue. She focused on Eli. On giving him joy. On making meaning out of her choices. But every time Eli smiled, she saw John's calm in him. Not genetically, of course, but in spirit. The way he observed, the way he didn't rush to react, the way silence lived comfortably inside him. Clara visited often, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just to sit. One day, she handed Sophia a small magazine. A scientific journal. John was on the cover, blurry photo. Not posed, the headline read. The researcher who refused the spotlight. How silence built the future of pediatric recovery. Sophia didn't cry, she just stared, and then whispered. He was always meant for more than me. Her days stretched slowly after that. Not empty but still. Eli learned to walk. Sophia returned to writing. She published a short memoir, carefully avoiding John's name. But the dedication read, to the one who taught me that love is not owed, it's chosen. Years passed. One afternoon, at a wellness conference, she saw his name on the speaker list. She didn't plan to attend, but she did. He walked on stage quietly, same posture, same look in his eyes. But something in him had shifted, lighter, calmer, unburdened. He spoke about resilience, about how healing is often not dramatic but quiet, slow, and unseen. Sometimes, he said, near the end, we leave not out of anger, but out of respect. Because we know the version of ourselves someone loves is not the version they need. Sophia sat in the back row, heart frozen. Palms pressed together. When he exited the stage, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He nodded. She smiled, that was all. She didn't follow, didn't write, didn't ask for anything. Some wounds weren't meant to be reopened. Some closures don't need doors, just distance. Sophia returned home. Eli was playing with paints, his hands messy, joy unfiltered. She kissed the top of his head, whispering, "You were born of something brave, but not all bravery is meant to last." The Global Medical Summit in Geneva buzzed with prestige. Men in tailored suits, women in graceful blazers, translators. Whispering in earpieces, it was a hall of the world's most brilliant minds, gathered to recognize the ones who had quietly saved lives with the precision of code and molecules. John had never wanted to attend. He hated spotlights. He preferred labs, data, silence. But his team had nominated him, and the committee insisted. His gene therapy advancement had rewritten treatment timelines for children with rare neurodegenerative disorders. It was no longer a theory, it was being implemented across 4 countries. He arrived late, chose a backdoor route to avoid interviews, and walked slowly down the glass hallway that stretched between the conference halls and the central pavilion. That's when he saw her. Sophia, her hair was longer, now darker at the roots, twisted in a low knot. She wore muted earth tones, no makeup, just soft lines of age and grace, carved gently into her features. She stood by the window, phone in one hand, name badge swinging from a canvas strap across her shoulder, Sophia M. Rhodes, panel, speaker, trauma and early childhood parenting. He stopped. breath caught somewhere between memory and muscle. She turned instinctively, as if she already knew. Their eyes locked. For one long, fragile moment, the years between them crumbled like thin paper letters, never sent, apologies rehearsed but unsaid, dreams dismantled quietly, breath by breath. Sophia stepped forward. "John," he nodded. "Sophia." They stood a few feet apart. Sunlight, casting their reflections into the glass. She exhaled softly, a laugh caught in grief. Did it all really end, just like that? John looked at her, not unkind, not cold. Just truthful. "No," he said quietly. "It ended long before that. We just refused to admit it." Her eyes welled. "You never called. You never asked me to." Sophia swallowed hard. "I thought you'd scream, blame me, hate me." He looked away for a moment. "I thought you'd understand why I couldn't." She leaned against the wall, fingers tightening around her phone. "Eli's 8 now. He likes puzzles, quiet music. Sometimes I think he remembers you, even though he's never met you. I hope he's kind." "He is," she said. "He's so kind it scares me." John looked at her again. "Then you did something right." There was no bitterness in his voice, just distance, a gentle acknowledgement of something lost. She stepped closer. Not enough to close the space, but enough to tremble within it. "I used to imagine what I'd say if I ever saw you again," she whispered. "But now I just feel tired. Not because I don't care, but because I finally stopped hoping you'd still be angry." "I was never angry," he said. She blinked. Just heartbroken. The silence wrapped around them again, this time not cutting, but warm in its honesty. They sat down on a nearby bench, tucked in the glass corridor. Tourists passed in flashes of color beyond the windows. Their badges lay quietly in their laps. Sophia didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't plead. She just talked. About Eli's first words. About how she couldn't sleep for months after he left. How she tried to love Smith, but love isn't something owed, something given freely, and she had already spent all of hers. John listened, the way he used to. She cried not the dramatic, aching sobs of regret, but the quiet tears of someone who had learned to live with a choice that still weighed differently each day. "I thought I was being good," she said. "Good to someone who saved me. But I wasn't careful with the one who stayed." John reached over, wiped one tear from her cheek with his thumb, just one. Then let his hand fall beside hers. She didn't reach for him, but her pinky brushed his. A soft contact more intimate than any embrace. "I never stopped hoping you'd be happy," she said. He smiled barely. "I am, and whole?" she asked. He paused. "Thought for a long while, half-packed," he admitted. "But moving," she nodded. "Me too." They stayed that way for a while. No confessions, no grand finales. Just the gentle quiet of two people who had loved, failed, broken, and rebuilt separately. When it was time for his keynote, he stood. She stood with him. Their fingers brushed once more. He looked at her, not with longing, but with the peaceful gaze of someone who had long since let go. And then he walked into the Summit Auditorium to accept his award. She watched from behind the glass, a silent audience of one. Sophia eventually stopped chasing redemption. She and Smith settled into a quiet rhythm, not as lovers, not as soulmates, but as co-parents bound by something deeper than passion, the shared responsibility of a child who never asked for complicated beginnings. Eli grew fast, kind, observant, with a strange wisdom that made teachers pause. Sophia poured herself into his world. She joined local programs, wrote essays on parenthood and imperfection, and started a small column titled Letters I Wrote to No One. It became unexpectedly popular. That the column wasn't bitter. It didn't name names. It was reflective. Gentle. She talked about choices. About how a person can mean well and still leave wounds. About how we often confuse love with obligation. How sometimes paying one debt means creating another. Readers wrote in, moved by the honesty. She answered every letter. Eli once asked, "Are your letters real?" "They're feelings," she replied. And feelings don't need to be perfect to be true. Smith stayed nearby, attending parent-teacher conferences, soccer matches, weekend science fairs. He married a violinist named Eco 2 years later. Sophia attended the wedding with Eli. She even took photos. There was no trace of the woman. She once was the girl who believed love could be repaid like a favor. Now, she simply wanted peace. For herself. For Eli. For everyone she'd once hurt. As for John, he moved to a coastal town in Ireland. The research grants had slowed by then, not from failure, but completion. His therapies were adopted by global pediatric units. Other scientists carried the legacy forward. He bought a small house facing the cliffs, with vines that wrapped around the porch rails and wind that sang differently every day. There. He started writing again, not research, but stories. His first book was for children. It was called The Goodbye That Grew. Flowers. It was a quiet tale of a boy who planted a goodbye in the soil, watered it with silence, and one day woke to find blossoms stretching toward the sun. The boy didn't return to what he lost. He just sat by the flowers and let them grow. It wasn't a bestseller, but it became something quieter, something parents read aloud in hospital waiting rooms and grief counselors kept on their shelves. Once a year, John agreed to speak. Only once, he chose universities far from where he once lived. He spoke to students about patient care, about dignity, about how not every wound can be fixed and that's okay. He never mentioned Sophia. Not once. Not even when a journalist asked, "What shaped your commitment to pediatric trauma therapy?" He just smiled and said, "Life." He received letters sometimes. Some from old friends, some from readers, some anonymous. One envelope arrived with a children's drawing, inside crayon swirls of flowers on a hill. No name, just a line on the back in familiar handwriting. "Thank you for planting something I didn't know how to grow." He framed it above his writing desk. Sophia never remarried. John never did either, but neither of them lived in sorrow. They just lived. Different towns. Different chapters, but the same understanding that some stories don't need reunion to be complete. Just acceptance. They never reconnected, but they never resented, and in the quiet corners of their lives. Through a shared child's laughter, through a book in a stranger's hands. Through columns that softened hearts, and lectures that changed minds, they stayed written in each other. Not in ink, but in growth. A late autumn wind brushed gently down the street as Sophia held Eli's hand, walking past rows of windows lit with warm yellow light. They had just come from his piano recital, a small one, held in a nearby church hall, where he played slowly, nervously, but with a depth that made more than one parent tear up. They turned the corner past the florist, then paused briefly in front of the bookstore. Eli was tugging at her sleeve, pointing at a new comic displayed near the window, but Sophia's gaze had already landed somewhere else. There, on the front shelf, upright and glowing beneath soft spotlights, stood a single book, The Things We Leave Behind So Others Can Grow, by John M. Carver. The cover was quiet, a small sapling pushing through cracked stone. Sunlight falling on its leaves. No blurbs. No endorsements. Just the title. Just the name. Sophia didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Eli followed her gaze. "You know that author?" Sophia smiled slowly, softly. Her eyes didn't water, but something behind them flickered with memory. "I did," she said. "He was someone I loved." Eli waited. She squeezed his hand gently. "And someone I Let go. He nodded, perhaps not fully understanding, but sensing it mattered. Then they kept walking, and behind them, through the glass, the book remained. A quiet testament, a seed planted long ago, still blooming in someone else's hands.